Hi, I'm Elaine Perez. I'm a senior PM at Square, and today we're going to talk about the frequently asked questions that I hear about how to land a PM job. We'll talk about 5 questions. The first is my background and how I got my PM roles. Second is what are tips and tricks for someone who's trying to get their first product management role. Third, how can I make my application stand out, whether I'm new as a PM or I'm an experienced candidate? 4, where should I invest my time prepping for an interview? And lastly, is a credential like an MBA or product management certificate required? So first up, I spent about 7 years in advertising and marketing on the agency side. I started becoming interested in defining the strategy and solving problems on the client side. So I went and had an interview for a brand analyst job. And that company said, we could hire you for this job, but to really excel, you're gonna need an MBA. So I went and got an MBA. I attended Emory's evening MBA program. And then as a part of the on-campus recruiting that they offered, I was recruited to homedepot.com as a project manager. I worked as a project manager for about a year and then saw that product management was really aligning with what I was after. It gave me a chance to look at the strategy, how to solve specific problems. It was perfect. So that's how I moved into product management. After homedepot.com, working on checkout and appliances there, I went to DHL. DHL was spinning up a new product to offer fulfillment as a service, and they had a scrappy little team. So I led the product team, and I also worked on operations. From there, I was recruited to Square, where I've worked on discounts, taxes, subscriptions, and currently I'm working on inventory. In all of my product experience, I've been involved in hiring. I would really recommend it if you can, for a couple of reasons. One, you're gonna have a big impact on the company. Companies are made up of people. Any product decision that I make could be overturned by the next person who comes along and fills my product role. In a couple of years, it could be completely different. That's not true when you're involved with hiring. Hiring impacts the culture of a company, and while people don't stay at one company forever, the impact that you have is quite large for the effort that you put in. The other reason that I really like it is it gives me this really clear understanding and consistent calibration for what my company is looking for my particular function. That helps me do a better job for the company, and it also helps me understand how to best position what I'm doing to advance my career. So on to that next question. What are some tips and tricks for someone trying to get their first PM role? First off, I'd say learn as much as you can about the discipline. I've listed some of the things that I've read that have helped me, some books, some blogs. I also listen to podcasts. I'd recommend finding things. You're welcome to start with this list. You could ask a mentor, you could ask other product managers, what are they using? But just learn as much as you can. Next, I'd say look at what you've accomplished or learned that demonstrates and aligns with PM skills. So I've listed out all these PM skills as a toolbox for you, and your goal is to try to align as many things that you've done or learned with these various skills. And what you're going to do is you're going to format your resume so that it's in accomplishments that demonstrate these skills, and when you go in for an interview, you're going to be ready to talk about examples that demonstrate these skills. Lastly, cast a wide net and keep an open mind. So, for example, in my background, I had that adjacent position where I went from being a project manager, because that's what homedepot.com was recruiting for when they came to Emory. And then I realized that product was where I wanted to be, and I was able to make that transition. I've seen lots of different types of roles transition to product. For example, customer success, consultants, engineers, entrepreneurs, product marketing. There are lots of people that become interested in product and are able to transition within their same company. The other thing you might consider is taking on some risk. If you don't have product experience, that means that a company is going to be taking a risk on you. You also might have to be taking a risk on a company and looking at a newer startup, for example, where you might not be sure that the company will be around in a few years, but you can take on that risk and thrive in that atmosphere to get some of that experience. Lastly, apply. You have to remember that it's a conversion funnel. So you've got the applications that you send out, and then the number that get asked for a recruiter screen, and then the number that make it to the next interview phase, and people are dropping off at every phase of that funnel. And so you want to apply to as many roles as you possibly can so that you can get a smaller subset of interviews and get a smaller subset of offers. My recommendation would be to apply to anything that has 1 to 2 years of experience if you're brand new, if you're a new grad. If you're trying to transition from another role into product and you have some experience, it's a little more flexible, but I would say it's not going to be one-to-one. I don't know that you'd be able to leverage 7 years as an engineer to a very senior product role, for example. So I would experiment and try different levels of experience and really focus on telling that story about how your engineering is going to help you and the skills that you've learned that are adjacent to product. The other thing about applying to a lot of positions is I'm not aware of any penalty for applying to a lot of different positions of the same type. So for example, if Square has multiple product roles open and multiple of them look like they could be a fit, apply to all of them. Big companies often have many recruiters working on different sets of filling different roles, and so it can be helpful to get in front of different recruiters and different criteria. The only caveat there is applying for very different roles can sometimes send a mixed message to a company. So if you are applying for a product role, if you're an engineer now, applying to both engineering and product roles may send a mixed message of that you don't know what you want to do, so you might avoid that. Don't take it personally. It's very difficult, I know, but I want to give you this case study as a way to think about how this could happen. So in this example, a company's extended an offer to a candidate who interviewed last week. You have an interview this week. So what do you think happens? A, the company cancels your interview. B, the company proceeds with your interview. Or C, the company shares the information and gives you a choice. In all likelihood, it's B. The company is going to proceed with your interview. You will have no idea that an offer has been extended. And there's a reason that this happens, because the offer hasn't been accepted. That means the pipeline is still open. There's a chance it could be rejected. So the company wants to make sure that they keep your interview, and it wouldn't necessarily be a great idea to tell you that an offer has been made. And so you could have the best interview of your life and that other candidate accepts the offer, and there's absolutely nothing that you could do about it. It seems like a bummer, but there are also good things about it. So good thing number one is it's not personal. Number two, it gave you a chance to practice and hone your interview skills. That's something that's really difficult to practice in a live environment. You don't have that many interviews in your lifetime, in all likelihood. And then third, if you had a great interview, there's a possibility that if that role is filled, they'll consider you for a future role or for another role that's open in the org. So don't feel bad about rejection and don't take it personally. Just do your best. Stay positive and keep applying. How do I make my application stand out? So I've been thinking of this of where I would spend less investment, where I see candidates sort of over-investing today, and where I would put more investment. So less investment would be pre-qualifying companies using LinkedIn. The most common message I get from prospective candidates on LinkedIn is, I think I'm interested in this role, can we have a conversation? And that's a fine thing to ask, but I would argue it doesn't actually benefit you that much at that stage. So we talked about that conversion funnel, and if you spend a whole bunch of time pre-qualifying at the top of the funnel, you're wasting effort on companies that might not convert for you into a recruiter screen or an interview. So I wouldn't worry about it now. We'll talk about the right time for LinkedIn later. The second request that I get is, can we talk? And then after that conversation, can you provide me with a referral? Which I would call a weak referral, because if I don't know you, I haven't worked with you, all I can say is that we talked for 30 minutes and you seemed like a decent human being who could communicate well. So it's a weak recommendation. It doesn't mean much in any hiring process that I've been a part of. And so I really wouldn't spend the time trying to get that meeting, have the conversation, ask for the referral, only to have it really not amount to very much. But where I would spend more investment is a very tight one-page resume, one-page-ish, highlighting your accomplishments. So to unpack that a little bit, by tight, I mean it is perfect. Your formatting is consistent. You don't have any errors of any kind. You've also edited it. So in my experience with that 7 years of marketing and advertising experience, I could list all that out, but it's not really relevant. So I have a single line saying that I have this additional experience and I can provide more information if necessary, but I'm not going to list it out and have a 4-page resume. The last thing is, make sure you're focusing on accomplishments and not job responsibilities. An accomplishment might be something like you improved a conversion by this many basis points or X%. You drove revenue growth of this much. Your product had this many new subscribers after you launched it. You took something from 0 to 1, those types of things. Every product manager is responsible for a roadmap. So saying that you completed a roadmap is really just you ticked a box and did the basic thing that product managers are supposed to do. So I wouldn't waste your precious resume space on it. What I would try to leverage are strong referrals and recommendations if you have them. You won't always. That's not something that I've ever had going into a new role with maybe one exception. So leverage them if you have them. That would be someone you've worked with in the past who's at the company you're applying to, who can say with a lot of conviction and a very strong recommendation that they recommend you for this role and think that you're a good fit. One cautionary word is around job hopping. This means the majority of your experience is 1.5 years or less at each company on your resume. Why this is a problem for me, when I review resumes, I'm looking for a track record of success. It's a really positive thing if you've worked for a company, they've had a chance to get to know you and see your work, and they think, hey, let's give this person more responsibility and promote them. That's a track record of success. If you're hopping around in 1.5 year increments less, I'm probably not going to see that. And so I don't know how your prior companies felt about you or if your work was good. The other reason that it's a flag is it's very unlikely that you're going to have really been able to see the results of your decision making. Product management is about decision making. And I heard a rule of thumb from HR that if you spend 1 year mastering your role, you spend the second year performing at that level of mastery, and in the third year, you're going to see your sort of top results. I would say after 1.5 years, for most products, you're not going to see those results in that amount of time. The last thing is putting yourself in the shoes of a hiring manager and having empathy for them. It can take 6 to 9 months or more for a job pipeline to be opened and for a candidate who's been onboarded to be in the seat. And so if you're only going to stay for a short amount of time, that is a lot of cost and pain for the company that they're not excited about repeating. So empathizing with them, just know that it's a big flag. It's not the end of the world if you have 1 or 2, if it's an exception and not the rule. I have those exceptions in my resume. One example is when I was in the advertising and marketing world, the agency that I worked for lost the client that I was focused on. So I was let go after a very short time. Luckily, I was able to be hired at the next agency that client hired, which was a positive story to tell, but it looked funny on my resume because I had this really short 8-month stint between jobs. But be ready to talk about it and it'll be okay. Just don't make it the rule. Where should I invest my time preparing for an interview? So we'll go through the common format and what's happening in each phase, and then I'll go through the same sort of slide with how to prepare. So first there's a recruiter screen. They're looking for clear communication. They're reviewing your resume, making sure everything that they understood is jiving with how you're describing it, and they're looking for a lack of flags. Next up, you're gonna have a talk with a hiring manager in all likelihood. They're looking for fit with the team. They're gonna do more detailed experience review, and they're gonna ask you some behavioral questions. Like, tell me about a time when. Then, a lot of companies have panel interviews where you're gonna go in depth on more specific PM skills. These are things like leadership, strategy, analytics, partnership with departments like design, marketing, sales. Those are some examples of the types of panel interviews you might have. Interviewers might be from across disciplines, and you may encounter some case studies at this point. That might be like, imagine you're a product manager for the specific product. You have a goal or a problem, maybe a little bit of data. Talk me through how you think about this. Lastly, you may have an exercise where they're looking for you to demonstrate some of those PM skills, either in a document or a presentation type of a format. So practice and preparation for each phase. So for that recruiter screen, I would really hone in on doing my 2-minute overview of my background and get comfortable with it. I would be comfortable highlighting my accomplishments that are included in my resume, maybe a few extra, and I would be ready to answer, why are you looking and what are you looking for? Next up, on the hiring manager side, I would expect those behavioral questions, and I would practice answering some common ones with the STAR technique. That's situation, task, action, and results. It helps keep you from rambling and gives some structure to your answers to make sure that you're getting into all those parts that a hiring manager might be looking for. Next, I would have researched the product and company at least at a high level. And last, I would bring some questions to ask the hiring manager. Next up for the panel, practice those case questions and practice doing math out loud, public math as I call it. You can find some common case questions online, and I would practice answering them. It's okay to take a little bit of time to think about an answer and make some notes and jot things down. Next, I would review common PM frameworks and formulas. So on the formula side, this might be a break-even point. You might want to look at conversion, lifetime value, customer acquisition cost, and retention rate. Those would be some that I would start with. If you are looking at a specific industry that, like SaaS, for example, you might look at like annual recurring revenue in ARR and MRR. This is where, for the panel portion, this is where I would spend that LinkedIn networking effort. We'll talk a little bit more about what you're looking to do there. And then I would bring more questions. Each panelist will give you a little time at the end to ask questions. Lastly, for the exercise, invest as much as you can to present your best work. Companies may give you a guideline that most candidates spend X amount of time, or we intend for you to only spend 4 hours on this thing. As long as it's a guideline and not a rule, I would spend as much time, and I would try to schedule that presentation or the due date long give me time to do that work. You're being compared against people who are all doing the same thing, so you're being calibrated. So if you imagine that they might put a little extra in, then you're going to be compared to them, and that's the reality. And I would think about that and put as much as I could into it. So a little bit more on practice and what you're trying to do, what you're not trying to do. You want to refresh your memory of details. Things that you accomplished. If it was a role from a couple years ago, or an effort from a couple years ago, if somebody asked you to tell you tell them about the results that you achieved. Can you remember those metrics? You want to be able to find that information, pull it out, and have it ready to go. Next up, you want to get the tone right for difficult questions. So that classic one of asking about your weaknesses or talking about time when you had a conflict with somebody on your team and how you handled it. You make sure you're comfortable talking about it and you're talking about it with a positive tone. As you practice, take note of jargon that you use. Remember that you're communicating with someone in a new company that doesn't necessarily use the same acronyms or abbreviations, and try to eliminate it from your answers to make sure that you're communicating clearly. And lastly, you're just trying to increase your comfort level. You want to present yourself in the best way that you possibly can, and practicing will help you do that. What you want to avoid, though, is getting word for word memorized answers. I've seen some candidates do that, and it's very apparent to me because the energy is different. They don't present things the same way. Whenever it's word for word, it can come off that way and feel rehearsed. And we're not actors, we're product managers, so you're probably not going to do it very well. So don't go to the word for word level, just be comfortable. Lastly, I would avoid any negativity about your current boss, your company, your coworkers. Think about, even if you're in a situation that's less than ideal, or if somebody is not the best coworker to you, I would think about it, what could you learn from that? How could you have done something better? One place where I've seen candidates stumble is in answering some of those tough questions about conflict, not taking accountability, or presenting things like, this thing sucked and it was everybody else's fault but mine. It doesn't come off well. So I mentioned LinkedIn networking, doing that at the panel phase. Here's what you're trying to do. So now is when you're going to get the value out of connecting with somebody on LinkedIn from the company. You have a much higher probability of actually getting a job because you've advanced to the panel round. And now you really need the information that you can get from a Q&A and back and forth with a person at the company. So I would bring questions from the research on the company if something is confusing or doesn't make sense. I would ask for recommendations on how to prepare for my interview. I would ask about the team, about company culture. Just get as much information as you can. My order of preference would be someone on the same team that I'm interviewing for. It's not always possible, or they might not respond. So then I would focus on someone who's in the local office that I would be working in if the company has multiple office locations. And then lastly, I would target people from the company. And it may take you reaching out to 25 different people to get just one or two bites back who are willing to talk to you. So I'd be clear about where you are in the process and what you're trying to do. It's not about getting insider information for the interview, just whatever they can share. Oftentimes they can tell you at least more about what to expect, and they may be willing to talk about things that they've seen be successful or unsuccessful, like I'm doing. I want to emphasize that you have to remember to evaluate the company's fit for you and the role's fit for you. The company's evaluating you, you also have to evaluate the company. Ask tough questions, and a great time to do that is if you can connect with someone before your panel interviews. Keep it professional, but that gives you a little more leeway to be a little bit less concerned that, if I ask about work-life balance, they'll think I don't want to work hard, or any potential concern you might have that would keep you from really asking the questions you want to ask. I would stay grounded in what you value. Don't give it up. If culture is important to you and you get some indicators that company culture isn't really all that healthy, if you have the choice, the luxury of choice, then stick to your guns, be choosy. Don't ignore flags. And as soon as you know that a company has thrown too many flags for you to be comfortable, it's time to withdraw gracefully. I've done this once before. Through the interview process, I just saw some things that I didn't like. The person that I would be working for was late. They did not acknowledge or apologize for being late. They were somewhat distracted during our interview together, And then it was meant to be structured as a panel interview, and it was chaotic. Panelists weren't on time. They were trying to grab other people in the hallway. And I take hiring seriously, as I mentioned. It's something I like to be involved in. And so having that chaotic experience as a candidate and seeing how they were treating it, to me that was a big enough flag that I contacted the recruiter and said, I'd like to withdraw. And you don't have to go into why. You can just say, I thought more about this and it's not a fit for me. And that's all it takes. There's no point in seeing whether you can get an offer, because you'll just tempt yourself if the money's a lot better than what you have now, for example. So if that isn't your top criteria of what you value, then walk away as soon as you realize that it's a no. Don't sink any more time into it. So I mentioned this idea of an exercise where a company might ask you to prepare something based on some kind of prompt and deliver it as a presentation or a document. Is this free work for the company? Is this okay? And I would say, in my experience of seeing it, I think it's okay, and I don't think it's free work for the company for a couple reasons. One, I've never seen materials that had been presented or as a part of an exercise utilized outside of the hiring decision. Expectedly, a candidate doesn't have the same depth of knowledge about the business, the customer, company. It's going to be really difficult to create production-ready work, after doing a week or two of work at the maximum. So that's okay, because the goal in the companies where I've seen it used is to see someone's product thinking, see them demonstrate those skills. They're not trying to get anything out of you that benefits their work product. However, I think you should trust your instincts. If something feels like it's exploitive, like they're asking you for something that is beyond what you're comfortable with, say no. Is a credential required, like an MBA or a product management credential? Typically, no. I haven't seen it as a hard requirement. I have seen roles where maybe it's a role where you're going to be a product manager for APIs, and it really helps if you've been a developer. And so maybe an engineering role, an engineering degree is preferred. But I rarely see them as hard requirements. So if you're thinking about a credential, this is how I would think about it. So first, I would think about the cost in terms of time and expense. Second, I would think about the knowledge and the skills that you want to get out of that program. For me, going into that MBA scenario, one of the things that I could tell that I was missing when I would see leaders and people that I aspired to have careers like them, it was clear that they understood finance and would talk about P&Ls, and there were all these things that they were talking about that I had no knowledge of. And so that was a gap that I was looking to close with the MBA. And it did that very well because there are a lot of courses that focus on finance that you can take. The next thing is think about the recruiting pipeline that you're going to enter. So in my history, I talked about being recruited. In one case, I was recruited from that program, and so that was a huge benefit to me. So as you look at a credential, whether it's a university or a certificate program or a boot camp, I would look at what companies are hiring out of that program. You could find out by asking the university or the program themselves if they have an official recruiting, on-campus recruiting or another official type of program. You could do it informally by looking at people who have that credential and see where they ended up. And if you see a lot of them at one particular company, it's clear that they're using that as a recruiting tool. So that's how I would think about it. And making that decision is ultimately personal and it has to be weighed, but I would make sure you know what you want to get out of it, and I think that that's either knowledge or skills and or recruiting. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed putting this together and talking about it. I've included my LinkedIn link there. If you ever want to connect, you can message me there. Best wishes, stay positive, and good luck in landing that next PM role.